But as when Jennifer did her talk on Saturday, she said topical is the nurse on the stamp, thematic is related to the topic. And so it's a broader, I guess, a broader definition is what I want to say. So when I write chapter chatter, I tend to include a lot of information because the newsletters are full of great information, but I'm not sure necessarily if it's all topical or all thematic, but I like to include them. And you see two elements on the side, a deluxe proof and a deluxe proof specimen. Specimen means this is a trial stamp before it's actually issued. And when we go to exhibiting, you need 2 elements on each page, but that's going to come up in a minute here. Okay, in the discussions that we've had, people have asked about album pages. So I threw this slide in. The sample on the right is what pages I've done. I can't say I've done all the pages, but I set them up very simplistically with the name of the country so that I could find them later is what they are. I have a bookcase full of white 3-ring binders in page protectors by country. The thing I do want to point out is, do you see the Office Depot Office Max? That's a store purchase card that the APS was sending out. It's a godsend at Office Depot. You get your Xeroxing there. It's so cheap. It's cheaper than printing it at home. So if you don't have one, join the APS and get one. Also, archival flecked pages. Part of it is sometimes on a white page, the stamps, particularly as they age, don't look their best. So I actually chose a gray flecked pages to bring out the colors in the stamps and the covers. Notice the notebooks all standing up on the shelf, because you can't lie them down. They'll get ruined if you have them lying down. Okay. The philatelic elements for the exhibit. This is a reference off of the ATA website for this article that lists all the elements that you can include in an exhibit. And so as you're putting your collection together, we tend to concentrate on looking at just single stamps, and the elements are going to be sort of the extras if you're thinking about exhibiting. But also you're going to reach a point where you've got all the stamps or you can't find certain stamps. So broadening the perspective of where you might be collecting covers, joint issues, and a number of things like that. In this cover, you can use the cancel, you can use the Clara Moss or the ambulance stamps, but you can't use the cachet necessarily. This is a joint issue. The nurse, of course, is in the background, but this is a Canadian doctor who was serving in China, so they issued a Canadian and a China stamp for this doctor. Okay, beginning stamps. Beginning nurses on stamps, they used the New South Wales postage stamp, which was a semi-postal, and they have an angel in the background, or charity. And it was designed as a semi-postal to raise money for consumptives or tuberculosis homes for recovery. So is that a nurse? Again, it's gonna be a question. But in the past, a lot of nursing was handled as a gratis, so that this allegory works well. In my collection, I have over 3,000 stamps with a nurse on worldwide issues. So I just want to let people know that there are quite a lot. I do manage it on Excel. I did a rough count, and I have 271 countries for these 3,000 stamps came from 271 countries. The UPU says they have 192 countries. So some of my countries no longer exist. but I still list them separately because that's the way I do it. Pandemic and Nightingale's new issues. There's a lot of times when you're collecting stamps, even though it's not really a small number, but I sort of ran aground. For last 3 or 4 years, I had 20 stamps that were modern issue, 1970s, 1980s. Nobody ever had them. I would go to stamps shows and not find anything at all. And the advantage of having a pandemic and the 200th birthday of Florence Nightingale's birth is suddenly now I'm overwhelmed with stamps being issued by countries around the world. So my need list is now doubled in size, and that's helped because one of the stamp dealers told me that the near modern stamps were produced for philatelic society, and until somebody's collection is sold, it would be very difficult to find those stamps. So, okay. You can also zero in and do nursing leaders on stamps instead of the entire collection. And Florence Nightingale, of course, is the most modern. She was considered the starter of modern nursing. She went to nursing school in Germany, and in Germany they call them deacons, whereas the British call their nurses sisters, and in the United States we call them nurses. So we have these recognition of the schools of nursing in Germany. Now, the story behind Florence Nightingale is she was a fairly wealthy family, and she went to the Crimean War, and the death rate was very, very high. But it was actually, as you see in the right-hand corner, Mary Seacole, who was a Jamaican, kind of we would call her a nurse. It was before nursing schools really started. Her mother taught her how to take care of people in a boarding house. But because she was an African American, she's not African American, she's a Jamaican. She's a Black Jamaican. And she was denied the going with Florence Nightingale's group to the Crimean, but she went to the Crimean War by herself and set up a boarding house and started to feed and clean soldiers, and her death rate went down. So she really taught Florence Nightingale that proper hygiene and good food would save the soldiers more than just well, what was happening at the time, which was practically nothing other than amputations. There has been more recognition of Mary Seacole and her influence on nursing in stamps too. Okay, covers enhancement of the topic. This year is Florence Nightingale's 200th anniversary of her birth, so there are a lot of new issues. What seems kind of, sometimes I think silly, because this souvenir sheet came from Sierra Leone. They have the same pictures that we see all over Florence Nightingale, but Florence Nightingale would have no idea where Sierra Leone was, nor do they probably know who she is. But it's your choice, it's your collection. Now the cover on the right is a cover that Florence Nightingale actually sent to another nurse, which is really just across London at the time, in 1898. And what's nice about this cover is because she signed it, you can compare her signature with other signatures for its veracity. And actually, I bought that one right in the middle of Hurricane Katrina. Okay, common designs are not all the same. This is just sort of a thing I discovered, was that when you look in the Scots catalog and they tell you like the Medical Congress stamps that they're issued by a number of countries, supposed to be like the one on the right hand side, but indeed actually some of them are not. They have the nurse stamp in there, so you have to go into the depth of the Scott catalog to see if there aren't different stamps that might include a nurse. These stamps are from Indonesia, and I put this placard down here because some of you may be old enough to remember that when you went to a department store in New Orleans, they went down to Canal Street, and they went in the department store and they bought stamps on the weekends on cards like this. And these stamps were created to give the impression that Indonesia was a country of its own. They were seeking independence from their Dutch colonization country. And so they said, but we have stamps, you can mail letters and send stamps. But actually these stamps were never really used. They were really prepared for the philatelic community. Again, different overprints on them changes the advancement of the battles to independence. Of course, Indonesia, their independence was difficult because Indonesia is a country of islands. So it's moving up the chain of islands to get their independence. Now, in this case, this is the Vichy government stamps. This is resistance, the resistant movement. As the Germans moved into France and started pushing the French government further south, they had Vichy government was the remains of the French government. They issued these stamps, again, not all the same for every country. And they're the child welfare world stamps. And they never actually left France. So this cover, you have to be careful when you buy these covers, because I thought, oh, wow, here they said they never mailed those or never used these stamps as real postage. But actually there are real stamps in here, and the cancel will tell you they happened, this was mailed here, 1948, which of course is after World War II has already ended. So they put some stamps that would cover the regular postage, and then they put the Vichy stamps on it. So you were misled to think that the Vichy stamps were actually used as postage. They weren't. They also are not the same common design through all of the countries that they were printed for. And some of them are engraved and some of them are photographed. And initially Scott's catalog, it's only been within the last 5 or 6 years they've actually been listed in Scott's catalog as existing at all. First day covers. Now, I'm not an expert on first day covers, but there's a little bit of difference about these three and how they qualify as nurses on stamps. This is, the top one is the Ronsler cover. And at the time that the first American Red Cross stamp, which was 1931, was issued, the U.S. Postal Service did not announce what the stamp was going to look like until the day it was issued. But Ronsler managed to get first day cachets on letters that looked very similar to the stamp itself and get them up and running for the day of issue. And people thought that that was, well, illegal, or that he had some inside information. So there's big stories about his covers. So you can put them in an exhibit and they have meaning. Whereas the two at the bottom have less value to an exhibit because it's the cachet that's the part with the nurse in it. I mean, other than student nurse. But anyway. So who is a nurse? So when, you know, again, you have to remember this is your collection. I keep telling myself I can change. I'm looking for consensus, and I'm asked all kinds of nurses as whether they agree this person's a nurse or not a nurse. But in the end, when it comes to push come to shove, if it looks like a nurse, it probably is a nurse. But educated and trained as a nurse. Nursing schools didn't start until very late, you know, about 1900 is when we're starting in with nursing schools. So some of the training before was all hands-on and by your mother. Then functioning as a nurse, sometimes you can see what the nurse on the stamp is doing looks like something a nurse would do. provided with nursing education, religious figures and actions and roles. Again, it comes down to, are they doing things that nurses would do? And some of these, the Saint Catherine de Siena was demonstrating way, years and years, hundreds of years ago. But because she was caring for the sick, she qualifies as a nurse. Wartime service, and now we've expanded it to disaster care and Red Cross work. Nurses honored by their country, and figures of nurses are nurses. It's like going through boxes and looking for people in white dresses and white hats. But on the left is were the three conundrums that I've dealt with over the last 10, 15, 20 years. The Good Samaritan, because the Bible says he bound the wounds, and it's more likely that the nurse would bind the wounds than a doctor. We've come to say that the Good Samaritan qualifies as a nurse. Clara Barton refused to go to nursing school. She was actually a school teacher, but she did a lot of nursing actions. So some people call her a nurse. Mother Teresa, her convent was providing nursing care to Indian citizens, but she herself was an algebra teacher, a math teacher. But I've since decided that because she overall probably provided personal care to patients, to call her a nurse. So where's the nurse? Yeah, this is bringing. You'll see in an operating room, we'll know in the operating room, there's at least one nurse. In an emergency room, there's at least one, if not two, nurses. But it's always easier, and you see in the downside here, the white dress, not necessarily with a white hat, but because it's civil service, this is probably a nurse. I worked in Africa for many years, so I know that this is a nurse because of what he's doing. So where is the consensus? Well, you could start a study group. I saw Diana has joined our talk group, and I put out a call at one of the ATA national meetings and said, anybody who wants to talk about nurses, come. And Diana came, and that's part of where you can start a study group. Call and get people to join you. Read the literature. Sometimes it's the captions or the labels from pictures or the article in the articles, the stamps that will tell you that that's being identified as a nurse. Sometimes you pick it up from websites. When I peruse the stamp show brochure, I always go through all the exhibits to see if there's one on nurses. Okay. We've talked a little bit about the white dress and the white cap. Depending on what country is producing them, they change colors a little bit. They look a little bit alike, but to some extent you wonder how in the hot Belgian Congo somebody could wear a heavy dress like that with a heavy hat and still be able to work with patients. I wonder about that myself. But all of the adaptations for a uniform, particularly with the head covering, is to protect the patients from the nurse's hair falling into their wound or onto the patient and dragging other particles besides dirt, could be infectious particles, into the wound. So they really is to protect the nurse, but also to protect the patient. Same thing with the long sleeves, is protecting from insect bites and any splashing of any of the wound serum and stuff like that. There are some Arabian Peninsula stamps where they're running around in high heels delivering Christmas presents. It's always strange to me for Muslim countries to have a nurse in high heels delivering Christmas presents. Not in uniform, but a nurse. This young lady here was 12 years old and practicing for the 2000 Olympics. And this photograph was taken in her trial training session. She actually dropped out of Olympic training and went to school and became a nurse. So she was kind of surprised to find herself on a stamp. There is also an Olympic athlete from one of the Caribbean countries. She won a bronze medal, and she's in the tab of the souvenir sheet. This is a color trial, and I just threw it in there so that you see it, you'll know what it is. Oh. Okay, why does it not want to change? There we go. During the First and Second World Wars, the royalty in Europe did have some of its women, some of the women trained as nurses, but some of them, as in the Spanish case, was to provide motivation for raising the spirits of the people by the nurse looking like a nurse and providing care to the soldiers. Queen Fabiola, which is this stamp here, and Princess Marie Astrid from Luxembourg, both of them actually did train as nurses. Queen Fabiola just died about 5 or 6 years ago, been very, very active in international nursing for years and years and years. And then it could be heroines. These Emanuela over here actually died following a disaster in flooding in Colombia. Clara Moss, one of the few US nurses on stamps, she is the only nurse and the only woman who died in the yellow fever experimentation in the Cuban American War. And then over here on the right, this is Edith Clavel. She was a trainee of Florence Nightingale's, and she went to Belgium to set up a hospital and a school of nursing. And when World War I began and the Nazis took over Belgium, she was actually working with the resistance and getting Canadian, English, and American soldiers out of Belgium and across the border. And she is probably the only nurse that we know has been shot by a firing squad. Student nurses, there's always lots of them. After the US Postal Services changed and they were announcing their nurses, they would send out a photo ad. So you can buy black and white photo ads of some stamps on eBay announcing new stamps. Catholic saints, this is Saint Catherine of Siena. She is actually she was considered a nurse, and she is considered the patron saint of nurses in Italy. And Francis Assisi was considered to be a nurse because he cared for plague victims in addition to the animals that he was caring for. Oh, the one other thing that I might put in here is Father Damien, who was a Belgian priest. He actually went to the Hansen's disease leprosarium in Hawaii and provided care for patients on that island. So he is now considered a nurse as well. This is a die proof with a signature. Part of this, I just put it because there's a lot of them around, but they're so pretty and I love them for African countries when they were proofing these stamps for future use. Okay, and now we're starting a little bit on American nurses. The Molly Pritchard stamp is really considered the first American stamp with nurses. Molly Pritchard, you can see her in the postal stationery down here, is that a lot of early wars and battles actually occurred within the site. They had spectators, that people from the towns and the cities or from the plantation would watch it, walk out to the battlefront and stay on the sidelines and watch what's going on. But also with an old cannon, you have to, after you fired it, you need to put water in it and cool it down, and then the tamping rod you have to cool down as well. in addition to the fact that these men are out here working and in the heat, they need something to drink. And so women were coming along, they were camp followers, and they would come along, they would call water out to the battleground to minister to the cannon and also to the soldiers. The overprint is 624, I think, of the US in the Scott catalog. When the New Jersey senators asked for the 150th memorial to the Monmouth American Revolution War, the United States Postmaster only allowed them to get an overprint of Molly Pritchard. Molly is considered a general name and picture because they're carrying a bucket of water or a pitcher of water. Although there is one particular wife of a soldier, when he fell with shot, she just stood up and took his place in managing the cannon. So in addition to cooling it down, she was also assisting in firing it. So her name is Margaret, and so Molly is sort of a nickname from Margaret. Then these are not all of the other nurses on stamps, American nurses on stamps. The ones with education, of course, is Martha Beveridge. She is the daughter of a vice president of the United States. She went to school in a hospital school in New York, and then she went to England to learn to be a midwife. And she then went up into the Kentucky Appalachia Mountains and delivered babies for years and years. Amelia Earhart was at Vassar College, actually, and did a training course in being a nurse. When she followed her mother and sister to Canada during the World War I, she found out in the hospitals they didn't have enough nurses. So the training that she had at Vassar, she went into the hospital and served as really a nursing assistant. Hamilton, Mrs. Hamilton here is actually, the story behind her is that she is one of the few people on a US stamp that was actually still living when this stamp was issued. And the Civil War stamps. Nellie Cashman actually is out in the gold rush country, and she carried a lot of food and water to some trapped miners up in the hills. And so she was considered a nurse from that standpoint. So here's another question, particularly when we talked about Clara Barton. Is Clara Barton really a nurse? Well, here's souvenir sheets or sheetlets, and are they legal or not? Again, to a country, Republican of Guinea, they don't know the first thing about Clara Barton, and Clara Barton has no relationship to this country. So why did they produce a souvenir sheet with her picture on it? For the philatelic, it's for the philatelic community. So you need to check with the UPU. They have circulars that will identify the illegals. So sometimes before they come out in Scott's catalog as being illegal, there's a circular that'll tell you. The Republic of Guinea or Mali will tell you that that's an illegal. So Clara Barton was a good soul, though. She worked hard. She's also the first federal woman employee, but that's when she was working in the patent office. So watch for the overprints, because you can see here, actually in this case, this stamp from Yugoslavia was first printed as a semi-postal with the B1 semi-postal. Then with the overprints, it became Yugoslavia number 15 in its definitives. So it's kind of the reverse from what we see in the Norway's student nurse stamp. The Honduran stamps, actually this one has no overprints on it, and the gold overprints are easier to find than none at all. So you have to kind of watch what's going on, different stamps. Semi-postal history. Turkey has a lot of semi-postal stamps because there were certain days that were designated in the mail service. You had to add the stamps. So there were a lot of supportive fundraising in using these stamps or on the mail. My $1 for $100 stamp, I was looking through a dealer's collection, and here's another white dress, white hat, was not on the ATA checklist. Looked it up and found out that I got it for $1, but it sells for $100 on eBay. This is a Cinderella's fundraising stamp, and this is actually from India, but it was the German government, the Nazis, that were encouraging them to support the war, their side of World War II, and also saying that it would push for independence from England. Revenue stamps, there's still revenue stamps with nurses on them, come from a lot of countries. But revenue stamps are going to be, this is war savings, taxes on certain products. Cancels, this one has the Railroad Postal Office. Bill can tell you about railroads. So it makes an addition for this collection in 702s because it was processed in the railroad. Here's a figure cancel. In this case, this was dedicated to Helen Fairchild Memorial Bridge. This was her family got it dedicated for her work in World War I. This is a regular letter, which is difficult because it's a nurse's letter. When nurses in World War II were commissioned as officers, they could censor their own material, but they also went free mail, which had taken years after soldiers got free mail. But now there's no stamp. So it's discouraging for me anyway. This U.S. Relief stamp, this is the first hospital ship that was designed and created to bring the soldiers off the battlefield in a way into a safer environment for surgery and that sort of thing. It also has a slogan in the slots here, which was outlawed 6 or 9 months after they started this. Also, you'll see in the hospital ships, they usually have their mail clerk signing the mail. Okay. First day issues. Here's the first day issue program for the Clara Moss. And then this one is in Australia. This is Ellen Savage. This is one of the first Australian hospital ships. It was sunk because it was early and wasn't recognized as a hospital ship, I guess, from the air, or the treaty wasn't signed not to bomb them. She was the only nurse that survived the sinking of the ship. And this is Eleanor Roosevelt in this maxi card, presenting her with a certificate of thank you. We have errors and fakes and oddities. So you can see the misperfed areas on these stamps. So you could be collecting just the stamps and realize that you have something extra for your exhibit. Now 702s, these are some of my favorite stamps, and I learned everything there is to know about stamps, about postage stamps, by collecting varieties of the 702. 702 was the 50th anniversary of the American Red Cross, which Clara Barton did work very hard to get accepted by the federal government. RPO. But notice this one in the center here. We see that there is no Red Cross. The Red Cross has moved all over off its main position. There's no Red Cross here. In actuality, I think there's only one real 702 without a Red Cross. It's thought to be in the right lower corner of the pane, that it had folded up and the Red Cross was printed on the back. This crossless stamp is actually a fabrication. I bought it on eBay. I actually have 2 of them now. two enterprising young men managed to get that red cross off the stamp that it was on the stamp, which of course, if it was done here in the United States, that's a felony, but you can buy them on eBay. Booklets and coils. At first I thought you would have to do this as a regular, oops. Sorry about that. That there aren't any nurses on coil stamps or booklets. And then I looked and that's not true. This is a new French one. So they have a French booklet of stamps. And then we have some priorities. I think this is more of a booklet than a coil with a nurse in it. Okay, difference between a collector and a philatelist is that the philatelist is studying the topics. And I put a few of the references up here that I used to find out about nurses on stamps. Getting new issues or new to the list. Part of that is reading basic philatelic literature. And it, you know, using ATA checklists. I've used other ATA checklists to find nurses. All the handbooks on women on stamps, I went through those, found some nurses, things like that. eBay is, of course, a good place to find new stamps with nurses on them. And then this one is Allen Brush. Now, this is a stamp club from Webster Grove. It's in St. Louis. They meet on Friday afternoons, Friday evenings. And he presented the stamp. I just loved the stamp. And I went up and down eBay looking for it, but it's a personalized stamp. So it was like one of only one. So don't fall in love with personal stamps, but I loved this stamp. And here's the website. He had referenced this man's website talking about the new coronavirus stamps that were being issued. And so a lot of them, of course, you can see they're going to be nurses in this group. So the mail was delivered while I'm talking to you, and usually I shout thank you to my mail deliverer because one of the quarantine advantages is I've been on eBay and buying all these new pandemics, new stamps. So almost every day is a delivery of something new. But I expanded my collection to be more of a thematic collection. The 702s, hospital ships, ambulance trains, cancels, covers related to nurses, and new pandemic stamps, because I had got stuck with the new moderns and had 20 stamps and would never find those 20 stamps. So now I have to expand it. I can go to stamp shows and spend lots of money. Okay, nurses on stamps happen every day. These are just some of the kid ones. And that is it.